the church and the gospel that the church professes is being tested in these days. And in that test is being shown to be lacking. I remember about 4 years ago, I started to take up running again. I had tried running at different times in my life, and about 4 years ago, I went out to run, and I had a set of kind of expectations in my mind about how fit I was. And I don't know, probably about 15 minutes into the run, my breathing became very difficult. I started to feel pretty bad. I wanted to stop, but I told myself, I'm in better shape than this. I just need to push myself, and I'm never going to get better if I don't push through. And I probably ran another 5 minutes and felt a lot worse for continuing on. I wanted to stop even more. And I probably, after that, ran another minute. I ran about 21 minutes. I was looking back at how long I was able to run, and I just felt like I could not run anymore. I was telling myself as I went, go a little bit further, go up to there, and then I finally started talking myself out of it altogether and said, when I get to that spot up there, I'm done. That's as far as I'm going to go. I think that day I ran a little over 2.5 miles in 21 minutes, and I was exhausted. My body hurt. I did not enjoy the experience. I felt kind of like a failure. I realized I wasn't as fit as I hoped. I was disappointed in myself. Yeah, it wasn't great. I feel like right now, over these last 4 months or so, a lot has been going on in my life and in our world. Obviously, we've been in the midst of a global pandemic that has changed the way we interact socially. It has made us be at home more. It's changed the way we interact with our work. It's changed our economy. It's changed even the tone and the feel of our social interactions around conversations politically. And then add to that the struggle for racial justice in this time. It's brought up a whole new awareness, a whole new tension, a whole new need for change. And you put these things together, this has been a significant test upon our faith, a significant test to the church, and a significant test to the message of the gospel that the church seeks to bring to the world and to stand in itself. And I want to make sure I see that the church has done some beautiful things in this moment. I've watched churches, leaders, people that are Christians, feed people who are hungry and try to be there to help those who are hurting. I've watched some churches join in the struggle and the fight for racial justice in America. And so there's been some beautiful ways that the church has been active. But I will say that by and large, overall, my sense has been that the church has been behind in its activity and in its response to everything that's happening. It's kind of been on its heels. And also that the message of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, has kind of been shown wanting, or the version of the gospel that American Christianity is sharing with the world is kind of coming up short in this moment. It feels like it's not quite answering the need, the cry of a global pandemic, of a major struggle for social and racial justice. And so, there's a test, and I feel like in this test, the church and its gospel are being shown wanting in this time. Something that's kind of helped me frame this feeling, this sense, this understanding. I've been reading a book over actually several years. I return to it now and again, called The Celtic Way of Evangelism, George G. Hunter III. One of the things George G. Hunter III has done is decades of research with people that are outside of the church, people who do not claim to believe in the message of the gospel that the church offers. And he noticed there are these kind of 4 enduring questions that people want to ask of not only the message, but the messengers. Questions that people are asking of the people who try to share whatever news or gospel message that they have. And here are the 4 questions. One of them is, do the people sharing this message believe the message themselves? We live in a time where there are advertisements all the time, athletes that are saying, hey, buy this product. There are spokespeople for different things. And so a legitimate question is, are the people who call themselves Christians and who are saying others should believe in this message, do they believe it themselves? The second question that he has found that they're asking is, if they believe it, do they live it? So is there some integrity in the lives of the people who claim to believe such a thing, and then their behaviors and their attitudes and their interactions and relationships? Is there a way of being able to see that what they believe is being borne out in real life? And then also, they're asking the question, does it make a difference? I mean, you can see that those are a little different. It's one thing to believe something, it's another thing to live it out, and it's another to be able to see in the lives of people who believe something and live that thing out, that it makes a difference, a positive, good difference in their lives, that it makes them better people, or that it somehow gives them more strength, or that it somehow allows them to evolve, develop, mature in a positive way, that it maybe helps them through difficult times. Does it make a difference in their lives? And then finally, more recently, he says, really one of the most important questions is, does this message and do the messengers who share it make a difference in the world? So at a broader space beyond the personal experience of it, does this message make a difference in the world? And I would say that in each of these areas, along each of these questions, as the church and as its message is being tested in a moment of pandemic and social upheaval and change, I think we're lacking, and we can kind of see how we're lacking in each of those different areas and those questions. For one, we continue to be a church that has a lot of adherents, a lot of people who consider themselves Christians and maybe even attend communities of faith regularly, who would say, when pressed, or would say in honesty, that they don't actually believe the message that is shared. I can just attest, as someone who's grown up in the church my whole life, as a pastor for over a decade, that I have met many people who are churchgoers, many people who consider themselves Christians, who, when asked about the historical tenets of Christianity, things for instance, in the Apostles' Creed, things like the Trinity, things like what Christ has accomplished in the cross and in his resurrection, that there are a lot of people who don't actually believe those things. And I would say that right there, that is being shown and borne out in this moment, that there are a lot of people who might call themselves Christians, but the Christian message isn't something they can really talk about in an educated, informed way, or in a personal, convicted way in this moment. It's kind of like, as the going has gotten tough, a lot of people have shown themselves to say, you know what, I actually don't believe in this message that God is with us, or that God is moving at this time, or that God is changing the world through the kingdom of God as exhibited through the life and ministry of Jesus. People don't believe it, and others are seeing that. They don't believe it. Another thing that has been a struggle for some time in the modern church has been the gap between people who believe something and if those people live it out. This is the issue of integrity and hypocrisy, right? You know, it's so often leveled against the church that people claim to believe one thing, but then they live a different way. That's also being borne out in this moment, that a lot of the claims about the good news of Jesus Christ, our love for one another, the way that we believe God works in the world, are kind of struggling in this moment to really be borne out into everyday life. We're kind of being shown for what we are in the church. We are more, right now, to me, seen as people who like to argue, who like to be right, who like to be kind of attached to our ideologies, our political flavors. We are getting distracted by the arguments and the voices and the fears that are happening more widely in the culture, and kind of are being shown to be without integrity of a message that we're living out in life. And then also, I think this is where it gets really personal. I've had to ask myself and really look at myself over these last few months and ask, does the gospel, does the promise of the church really help me in this time? Is it giving me the resource? Is it giving me the hope? Is it giving me the truth and the direction and the wisdom to not only endure this time, but to be faithful through this moment in history, through this time over the last 4 months? Is it giving me peace? Is it giving me love for my neighbor and my enemy? Is it giving me, is it transforming me? Is it making a difference in my life enough that I am experiencing this season with the grace of God and according to the good news of Jesus Christ? That's a real question. I wonder if you've experienced that similarly, if you felt like your faith is being tested, that the message you claim is being tested in this time. What are the things you're relying on? Where are you finding your bedrock in this time? Is it Jesus? Is it your faith? I think that question's being tested when the going gets tough. And then obviously that last question, does it make a difference in the world? And right now, it's hard for me to look around with all the voices that are being put up in the media, all the arguments that are there for us to witness or be a part of. It's hard for me to see the message of the gospel in the midst of it, leading the way in a positive direction. If anything, I feel like the gospel message is kind of quiet right now, that it's kind of holding back, that maybe it's a little uncertain and insecure and doesn't really know what to say in this moment. And so it's been shown, at least in the intensity of these 4 months, to feel or to be lacking in some way as a message that can lead us forward and through this time to a better future. And so that's been helpful to me to look at those 4 questions and to try to describe how I think in some ways the church is shown lacking. You know, it's interesting going back to the story about running, that I'm 4 years older now. My body is 4 years older, the same body that ran then. And after that run 4 years ago, I thought and felt about my body that it didn't have what it needed to run faster and further, to endure the pain and discomfort, to be more fit, to breathe deeply for longer, have my heart beat that much and that fast. It didn't have what it took. It felt like it failed that test. Well, here I am 4 years later, and I run much further, much faster, much more comfortably. It turns out that inside of me, in this body, was everything that was needed to be more fit and prepared for the challenge of running further and faster. Similarly, I think we have a choice to make in a moment when the gospel and the church is being tested and shown to be lacking. We can either look at it and say, well, I guess this church, I guess this faith doesn't have what is needed. We can forsake it. We can kind of give up. We can say, I'm unfit, kind of like my body can't run that. I hear people say that a lot. I can't do that. I just don't have it. I'm out of shape and it's impossible. Or we can keep running. We can believe that if we condition ourselves, if we truly come to the table and ask the hard questions and allow this test to kind of wake us up to where we are, that in fact there is a church and there is a faith that can be faithful in this moment, that can rise to this occasion and be something, a message of hope that can be for this world what is needed. And that's going to take time. It's going to take energy. One thing I know is that if I had continued to run as infrequently as I was before, if I continued to approach my body and my health in the way that I was, that it would truly continue to be the issue of being unfit that I was then. But I made a commitment to begin to run regularly and to understand my body more, and even to maybe change some of my other habits in life. And if it turns out my body was capable of more than I thought it was capable of. Friends, I think this is a moment of wake up, of awareness that we have been given in the midst of pandemic, in the midst of a world that is clawing and seeking for social change, for racial justice, among many other things. A world where there is just ideological war of words constantly happening that has kind of hijacked the church. I could go on and on with all the things that have shown us to be unfit for this moment. I think we can be fit. I think that the gospel of Jesus Christ is fit for this moment, even if our gospel that we've been living by and been sharing with the world is a version that is unfit. It can become fit. It must become fit. This is why it is so important to me to be a part of creating communities of faith that condition and shape Christians, people who claim the message of Jesus, to become people who believe that message, who live that message, whose lives are changed by that message, and who change the world because of that message. If we cannot be communities of faith, if we cannot be individuals that rise up to those questions that the world has of this message and of this church, then we fail. But I believe we can. In some ways, that's why I left ministry in the traditional church. You know, the traditional church sometimes equips and conditions and creates people in communities who are prepared to rise to that occasion. But I've also found that we should not expect to have those results over and over again. In fact, we need new models of church. We need new ways of making disciples. We need new ways of engaging evangelism, of having this message come into our lives to change us and change the world. I want to end with a couple of encouraging stories of why I believe there is hope, how I believe the church and its gospel can become fit for this moment. The first is a story about Dr. Francis Collins. Dr. Collins, when he went to medical school at 23 years of age, considered himself an atheist. He did not believe in God or in the Christian message. But while he was there at school, he encountered human beings at the bedside who were sick and dying. And it was because of the way they were questioning whether or not God existed. God was with them. God gave them hope in that moment. And if God would somehow give some promise after death, that Dr. Collins began to really think about faith. And he, as a scientist, began to look at the claims of faith and not look for proof, but look for ways that faith was pointed at as being valid, as being something that matters in human life. And he became a Christian before he left medical school. As an amazing scientist and as a person of faith, he continued to lead and grow to the point that he now is the director of the National Institutes of Health in this country. You might know of someone named Anthony Fauci, who has been a voice during this pandemic. Well, Francis Collins is his boss, and they are actually close friends. And Dr. Collins has also spent some of his life trying to bridge the gap between science and religion, between God and rational thinking. For him, these things help one another. And right now, Dr. Collins is one of the main point people internationally to help combat this pandemic, to create a vaccine. He's one of the most important players in this game that we are in. And he is very open about his faith. He's somebody who believes it, who lives it, whose life has been changed by it, and who is changing the world because of that message. I believe we can become fit for this moment. The other person I want to tell you about is Marissa Johnson. She grew up in Louisiana. She had a Christian family that didn't go to church, and she ended up going to a Christian university, but she wasn't interested in the Christianity she was aware of. But she encountered at college Christian thinkers who were open to her criticisms and questions. They were open to her desire for a different world that was more just. They entertained her continuing need to look into truth, and she ended up finding faith in a deep and lasting way in college and considers herself now a devout Christian. Well, Marissa Johnson is a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement in Seattle, of that chapter, and she will be very open with people about her faith being the backbone of her pursuit of racial justice, of her fight against racism in the world and in America. And she is another story of a faith that took hold of a life, that changed a life, and that has empowered a life to make a difference in the world. There are so many stories like that of Dr. Collins and Marissa Johnson. Maybe you're one of those stories that remind us that there is a faith, there is a message, there is a church that is fit for this moment. And that for all the ways that we have been shown to be unfit for this moment, that is not to say that we cannot become fit for this moment. Instead, it is an opportunity, a challenge, an invitation from God to become more, to have a gospel that is more whole, to become people of faith that are more hopeful and rooted in the promises of Jesus Christ, to become people who are more surrounded by the love of God for ourselves, for one another, and for a world that is broken and in need. Friends, we're not fit, but we can be. Thanks be to God. Amen.